Thank you so much to CVA and Vote Vets for having me here. Thank you to every veteran and military family member here. Your service to the greatest nation in human history inspires the best within us because you are the best among us. You're the heroes who've paid for the safety and prosperity of your fellow citizens with blood, sweat, pain, sacrifice, and an absolutely unmatched American courage. Your urgent mission now to advance a pro-veteran agenda is among the most critical in our nation. And while there is much to do, you have scored striking victories during the Trump presidency. You've mobilized a generation of veterans to vigorously engage in the most vibrant democracy that exists in the world. You've converted patriotic energy into meaningful legislation to expand VA choice, and it's the law of the land today. You've demanded VA accountability, and you got it. Over 10,000 incompetent, lazy, corrupt bureaucrats at the VA got to hear two of President Trump's favorite words: "You're fired." Your work ensures that our brave service members come home to the hero's welcome and receive the hero's care that they deserve. My district, thanks you especially. I represent the highest concentration of active duty military in the country. The Blue Angels are my constituents. The fiercest weapons delivered on time and on target by the United States Air Force are developed at Eglin Air Force Base in my home county. Almost every part of life in my district is favorably impacted by our connection to the military. Air Commandos lead our Boy Scout troops. Army Rangers coach our youth softball leagues. The deacon in my church maintains the flight line. My chief of staff is a military spouse, and the neighbor right now feeding my cat trains Marines how to disarm bombs. And it is on their behalf that I say thank you, President Trump, for rebuilding our military and passing the most robust national defense budget in American history. But a well-funded force does not need to be so well-worn. Today, our military is overstretched, over-deployed, and over-exerted. Growing up where I've seen my whole life what endless deployments and unfocused wars really mean for our most patriotic fellow Americans. I know you will have experienced some of these things or seen them. I've seen all of them. Tearful goodbyes at airports, bargaining with God for the safe return of loved ones, parenting disrupted, marriages destroyed, more counselors needed at our schools, drug abuse, domestic abuse, veteran suicide, shattered limbs, broken hearts, and grieving desperate families at Walter Reed Hospital. Caskets draped in flags, Gold Star families in mourning, and then roads, parks, and halls of learning named in permanent remembrance of the fallen. The fog of war is no fog to me or any of the 700,000 people I serve in the Florida Panhandle. It's not hazy. We see the impact of war every day among the people we love who have shaped our lives. It's a stark reminder that the unmatched freedoms we enjoy are not free. They are bought with the blood of American patriots. And it is our solemn duty and our highest responsibility to make sure that when this sacred currency is spent, it is only done when absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, prior to the election of Donald Trump, our decision makers have fallen short of this standard, demonstrating a tragic recklessness with the treasure of our nation and the blood of our patriots. Consider this: since 2001, the United States government has spent nearly $6 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Iraq War alone cost $4 trillion, not to mention the immeasurable cost of broken and lost lives. To give you some perspective, $4 trillion, what we've spent in Iraq, is more than the entire tax revenue of our nation last year. It would be enough to completely overhaul our nation's infrastructure, more than the entire market capitalization of Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Facebook combined. It is more than all of our nation's student loan debt and credit card debt combined. It is nearly 10 times our enormous $419 billion trade deficit with China, a country that was rapidly expanding without firing a shot while we were engaged in far-flung wars in the Middle East. We have been in Afghanistan for nearly 2 decades, It is the longest war in our nation's history, longer than the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, both world wars combined. American soldiers are dying in Afghanistan today who weren't even born when the war began. In Afghanistan, after 2 decades have passed, trillions of dollars spent, thousands of American lives lost, the situation on the ground is actually getting worse. A recent study for Congress found that U.S.-backed forces in Afghanistan control just 56% of administrative districts. That's down from 72% in 2015. Civilian deaths are also up, and despite $8 billion spent on counter-narcotics, the growth of opioid fields has not been slowed. One would think that the cautionary tales of Afghanistan and Iraq would make the war lobby and so-called national security experts more cautious about U.S. involvement. But they would be wrong. Instead, Hillary Clinton, backed by Republican war hawks, launched a regime change operation in Libya, removing the strongman dictator Muammar Gaddafi. That might sound humanitarian in theory, but there is nothing humanitarian or humane about the slave trade that is going on in Libya today or the migrant crisis that has brought Europe to its knees. The same thought leaders that were equally desperate for regime change in Syria sought the removal of Bashar al-Assad. And like Gaddafi, there's no question that Assad is a brutal dictator and an evil man. But the problem with these misguided calls for regime change is the lack of a superior alternative. The main beneficiaries of such an intervention would be ISIS and related terror groups fighting Assad. Luckily, the war lobby did not get its way in Syria largely thanks to President Trump, the only major presidential candidate who spoke against the idea. The so-called experts behind our failed foreign policy have not learned from their mistakes because they have not been accountable for them. And so today the saber-rattling persists toward Venezuela, Yemen, and Iran. As we look to these countries, it is our task to ensure that we don't just recount the past mistakes of others, but that we learn from them. And that we must be resolved not to start unwise wars or put our military in unwinnable or endless conflicts. We know from the tragic experiences that oppressors like Maduro, Rouhani, and even Kim Jong-un will use military conflict to scapegoat their own failures, export violence, and deny the desires of their own people to seek and taste freedom. In Yemen, Syria, Libya, and beyond, we should not fool ourselves into thinking that unwilling or unreliable local fighters necessitate the involvement of American troops. The examples of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, just to name a few, teach us that it is an illusion to think just beyond the life of every dictator lies a prosperous, inclusive democracy, rather than generations of anarchy, violence, terrorism, and chaos. The lessons we have learned should not be considered in isolation. Put together, they form and outline a successful Trump doctrine of American foreign policy. The Trump doctrine falls into 4 pillars. First, we build and maintain the strongest military edge over everyone, period. Second, American citizens come first. Foreign nations and special interests, no matter how much we may love them, don't call the shots in our country. Third, national security must begin at home, and national security is always linked to economic security. Fourth, an America First policy is not an isolationist or utopian policy. Others must know that we will respond and we will win. So the first pillar, an American foreign policy, is one of caution, common sense, and peace through overwhelming strength. I never want to send America's troops into a fair fight. That means providing the funding, equipment, infrastructure, and training and arms to deliver decisive victory every single time. The United States military must and will remain the biggest, strongest, and most lethal fighting force in human history, and we can never allow that to be in question. The second pillar, America First, means Americans first. This is a simple yet powerful principle. The interests of American citizens come before the demands of foreign interests abroad and special interests at home. It means not invading Venezuela because the idea of invasion is popular in Venezuela. It means not fighting a proxy war on behalf of a rich Persian Gulf monarchy. It means not sacrificing American patriots on the altar of multinational oil companies who need a profit boost. In short, A truly America-first foreign policy is not a lobbyist-first foreign policy. It is not a military-industrial-first foreign policy. It is not an armchair general cable news-first foreign policy. It is an America-first foreign policy. The third pillar. An America-first foreign policy must recognize that national security begins here in our great nation. As the President rightly points out, economic security is national security. This is why President Trump has worked so hard to secure our industrial sector from intellectual property theft and refuses to allow our nation and our workers to be taken advantage of with one-sided trade deals. I find it amazing that the trade war seems to be the only war that some of the so-called experts inside Washington seem to be against. Focus closer to home means that the Trump doctrine would prioritize the U.S. border with Mexico over sending our troops to fight and die on the Saudi border with Yemen. Stronger borders, energy dominance, and a thriving American economy do more to secure American security than ill-fated interventionist excursions in the name of regime change and nation building. We should focus on our nation building right here in America, strengthening our homeland. The fourth and final pillar, an America-first foreign policy is not an isolationist foreign policy. If our enemies mistook a more precise and focused America as disengaged or disinterested or recoiled, and they tested our capability, they would find us recoiled like a viper, ready to strike instantly with extreme lethality and purpose. Military action, including intervention, is always on the table, but only as a last resort, and only when there is a direct, concrete, and grave threat to the security of the United States or one of our allies. Just as the threat must be clear and concrete and well-defined, so must be the objectives of our military operations. We have to know what victory looks like in order to achieve it. Freedom is the most precious thing in the world. And it's for that reason that freedom must be fought for and won by those who yearn to live it most. Freedom cannot be America's gift to the world, purchased with the blood of U.S. service members alone. For oppressed people anywhere in the world to live any lasting freedom, they must be the driving force to make it happen. They must fight and die for it. They must bury their relatives over it. For generations, they have to tell stories of the patriots and brave people who fought and won it. Only then will any people be able to cherish freedom so much that they will never allow a strong man to take it away ever again. Plenty of DC pundits and Beltway hawks talk in terms of toughness to support American military action. They say we have moral obligations to intervene. Real morality and real toughness is standing up to the pro-war special interests and globalist power brokers. Real morality is affirming forever that the blood of American troops is not for sale to anyone at any cost. As I travel home to North Florida this week, I will meet with commanding officers. They will brief me on the missions and preparations undertaken, and if called to combat, my neighbors will go first and they'll fight the hardest, and I am incredibly proud of them. But as policymakers, it's our job to fight harder in Washington, to understand the deep consequences of U.S. military force, both at home and around the world. President Trump is staying true to the instincts he expressed when campaigning as an America-first, anti-interventionist Republican. Today's wiser, more cautious Trump doctrine will rile some of the so-called experts in this town, but it is supported by an overwhelming share of Americans. As President Trump's measured approach in Venezuela, Syria, and Iran proceeds, it will make our nation stronger. And we must continue to build on the Trump achievements in developing a 21st century foreign policy. Elected office holders of both parties have sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Together we can do so much more and so much better. This means not sending the next generation of patriots to fight unwinnable wars for unknowable gain. There always are places we could invade, people we could rescue, nations we could build. A clear-eyed look at the threats we face proves that peace through strength also means strength through peace. The Trump doctrine means continuing to rebuild our military and maintaining our dominance. It means listening to the American people, not the siren song of beltway pundits and armchair generals. It means taking a clear-eyed look at American interests, always focused on the well-being of our own great nation before we volunteer our brave soldiers to be the world's policemen. It means knowing that sometimes the fight is just and worth fighting, and knowing when America fights, America will win. This plan will make the world safer, more stable, and more self-reliant, instead of expecting and receiving American largesse at every turn. The Trump doctrine means that we must always put America and the American people first. Our heroic servicemen and women deserve it, and the enduring prosperity of our nation depends on it. Thank you all for your service. Thank you for being in the fight. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you.